Rome, 270 AD. In a modest residence on the Esquiline Hill, lamplight flickers across walls lined with scrolls. An old man sits motionless, eyes closed, barely breathing. His body remains in the chair, but something else has occurred: a departure without movement, an arrival without destination. His students know not to disturb him during these episodes. They have learned to recognize the signs, the absolute stillness, the face that seems simultaneously present and impossibly distant, the quality of silence that fills the room, a presence rather than an absence. Hours might pass, sometimes an entire night. This is not sleep. This is not meditation in any ordinary sense. This is what Plotinus calls henosis, union with the One, the source beyond all sources, the reality that precedes existence itself. When he eventually opens his eyes, he will struggle to speak of it. Language fails at this threshold. Words are tools of multiplicity. But where he has been, multiplicity dissolves. There is no subject and object, no experiencer and experience, no philosopher and philosophy. There is only the One. His name is Plotinus. To those who know him, he is the most profound philosopher in Rome. To himself, he is merely someone who occasionally succeeds in remembering what the soul truly is and where it came from before it forgot itself in the density of material existence. This was not merely personal mysticism. Plotinus had constructed an entire philosophical system to explain, justify, and guide others toward these experiences. He had synthesized centuries of Greek thought: Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, the Pythagoreans, into a coherent vision of reality as a cascade of being flowing from an ineffable source, and the human task as reversing that cascade, climbing back toward the origin. He taught that the universe is not a collection of separate things, but a single living whole, graduated levels of reality descending from perfect unity to multiplicity and fragmentation. He taught that the soul is not in the body, but the body is in the soul, that we are not fundamentally material beings having occasional spiritual experiences, but spiritual beings temporarily embedded in matter. He taught that beauty is not in the eye, but in the mind's recognition of unity within form. He taught that evil is not a force but an absence, a falling away from the good. Most radically, he taught that mystical experience is not a gift bestowed by gods, but a natural potential of consciousness itself, accessible through philosophical contemplation, ethical purification, and disciplined attention. Plotinus had experienced this union not once, but 4 times in his life, according to his devoted student Porphyry. 4 moments when the boundary between self and self dissolved, when thought ceased and what remained was beyond thought, when time collapsed and eternity became immediate. But to understand how a philosopher could experience what mystics claim and create what thinkers study, we must travel back to the city where everything began: Alexandria, the crossroads of ancient wisdom, where Greek philosophy met Egyptian mystery, where Eastern and Western thought collided and merged. 3rd century Rome was a world unraveling. Emperors murdered by their own troops, plague sweeping through cities, barbarian tribes pressing against frontiers, economic collapse, political chaos. The certainties of the Pax Romana were crumbling into doubt. In such times, philosophy becomes more than intellectual exercise. It becomes a search for what remains stable when everything visible is in flux. It becomes a question of where to anchor consciousness when the external world offers nothing solid. Plotinus offered an answer: turn inward. Not as retreat from the world, but as recognition of what the world actually is: appearance rather than substance, surface rather than depth, effect rather than cause. The true reality, he taught, lies beyond the reach of the senses, beyond even the reach of ordinary thought. It can be known only through a transformation of consciousness itself. This was not New Age mysticism. This was rigorous philosophical analysis combined with contemplative practice, logical argument wedded to mystical experience. Plotinus was not rejecting Greek rationalism, but fulfilling it, taking Plato's vision of transcendent forms and pushing it to its ultimate conclusion, a reality so unified it transcends even the distinction between being and knowing. His philosophy would be called Neoplatonism, though he never used that term. He considered himself simply a faithful interpreter of Plato, yet what he created went far beyond interpretation. He synthesized the entire Greek philosophical tradition into a systematic account of reality as a hierarchical emanation from a supreme principle, the One, and the soul's journey back toward that source. This was philosophy as spiritual practice. metaphysics as roadmap for transformation, logic as tool for transcendence. It was, in many ways, the last great systematic philosophy of the ancient world, and the bridge to everything that followed. Christianity would absorb his concepts of transcendence, though replacing his impersonal one with the personal God. Islamic philosophy would transmit his ideas through the Arabic translations, where they would influence Sufism and shape medieval thought. Jewish mysticism would echo his vision in Kabbalistic teachings about emanation and return. Renaissance thinkers would rediscover him and find in his work a spirituality compatible with both reason and revelation. Even modern psychology owes him a debt. His analysis of consciousness, his mapping of levels of self-awareness, his understanding that much of mental life occurs below the threshold of explicit awareness, these anticipate later developments in depth psychology. His insistence that the self is not identical with surface consciousness, but extends into depths we rarely access prefigures everything from Freud's unconscious to transpersonal psychology. Yet Plotinus himself would likely be baffled by his influence. He sought not disciples, but contemplatives, not followers, but fellow travelers on the path inward. His goal was not to create a school of thought, but to guide others toward an experience beyond thought, to understand that experience and the philosophy that articulated it. We begin where Plotinus himself began, in the intellectual ferment of Alexandria, where ancient wisdom traditions collided and fused into something unprecedented. Alexandrian awakening. Alexandria in the early 3rd century was unlike any other city in the ancient world. Founded by Alexander the Great nearly 6 centuries earlier, it had become the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean, a place where Greek philosophy, Egyptian religion, Jewish mysticism, and emerging Christian theology existed in constant, creative friction. The Great Library, though diminished from its legendary past, still housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Scholars from across the known world came to study, debate, and synthesize. In the streets, Greek logicians argued with Egyptian priests. In the academies, Stoic ethics confronted Platonic metaphysics. In the temples, ancient mystery religions offered initiations into secrets older than philosophy itself. Into this intellectual cauldron, around 204 AD, Plotinus was born. His birthplace remains uncertain, possibly Alexandria itself, possibly somewhere in Upper Egypt. His family background remains obscure. Porphyry, his most devoted student and biographer, tells us almost nothing about his early years. Plotinus himself rarely spoke of his past. This silence was not accidental. For Plotinus, biographical details were irrelevant distractions from what truly mattered, not the accidents of birth and circumstance, but the essence of the soul. He would later teach that the soul is not defined by its temporal existence, but by its eternal nature, not by what happens to it, but by what it fundamentally is. Yet even silence reveals. A man who cares nothing for his origins has already decided that origins are not where truth resides. A philosopher who never speaks of childhood has concluded that childhood explains nothing essential. This was Plotinus's first philosophical stance. Lived before it was articulated. The real is not the temporal. Alexandria provided everything such a mind needed. Plato's works were studied intensively in multiple schools. Aristotle's logic was taught alongside his metaphysics. The Stoics had left a legacy of ethical teaching. The Pythagoreans had preserved ancient wisdom about mathematics and the soul. Egyptian temples still practiced rites connecting material and spiritual worlds. But philosophy in this era faced a crisis. The great systematic thinkers were centuries dead. What remained were schools: Platonists, Aristotelians, Stoics, Epicureans, each claiming truth, but unable to reconcile their differences. Philosophy had fragmented into competing traditions, each preserving insights but losing sight of the whole. Plotinus came of age in this fragmented landscape. As a young man, he studied with several teachers, searching for something he intuited but could not yet name. Each school offered pieces. None offered completeness. The Platonists spoke beautifully about transcendent realities, but couldn't explain how those realities related to the world of experience. The Aristotelians analyzed the world brilliantly, but seemed to lose the transcendent. The Stoics taught ethics, but their materialism seemed inadequate to explain consciousness itself. For 10 years, Plotinus searched. He attended lectures, read voraciously, engaged in debates. Alexandria's intellectual richness was also its curse: too many voices, too many systems, too little synthesis. A hungry mind could feast, but never be satisfied. Knowledge accumulated without wisdom emerging. Then, at age 27, Plotinus met Ammonius Saccas. Ammonius was an enigma. He had been a porter. His name, Saccas, meant sack-bearer, before becoming a philosopher. He taught a small circle of students but wrote nothing. His philosophy was transmitted entirely through oral teaching, discussion, and contemplative practice. When he died, he left no written works, no school, no formal legacy, yet his impact was profound. Besides Plotinus, his students included Origen, not the famous Christian theologian of the same name, but another Origen who would become a Platonic philosopher. Longinus, the great literary critic and philosopher, called Ammonius's circle the most profound philosophical community of the age. What did Ammonius teach? The sources are frustratingly vague. Porphyry reports that Ammonius swore his students to secrecy about his doctrines. This oath of silence was eventually broken, but details remain sparse. We know Ammonius primarily through what Plotinus later taught, and what Plotinus taught was revolutionary. The essence was synthesis. Not eclecticism randomly combining different systems, but genuine integration. Ammonius taught that the apparent contradictions between Plato and Aristotle were superficial. Properly understood, they addressed different levels of reality. Plato described the transcendent. Aristotle analyzed the immanent. Both were true because reality itself is hierarchical. Lower truths do not contradict higher ones, but reflect them imperfectly. More radically, Ammonius taught that philosophy and mysticism are not opposed but complementary. Rational analysis prepares the soul for experiences beyond reason. Logical argument is a ladder that must eventually be climbed beyond. The goal of philosophy is not knowledge about transcendence, but knowledge as transcendence, direct apprehension of reality's deepest level. This was the synthesis Plotinus had been seeking. Not just intellectual understanding, but transformative practice. Not just theory about the highest realities, but method for experiencing them. Not just wisdom as information, but wisdom as realization. Plotinus remained with Ammonius for 11 years. What happened in those years remains largely hidden behind the oath of secrecy. Philosophical training, certainly mastery of Plato's dialogues, deep study of Aristotle's treatises, integration of Pythagorean mathematics and Stoic ethics, but also something more. Contemplative practice, training in concentration, systematic purification of consciousness. Ancient philosophy was not merely theoretical. Philosophers were expected to live their insights. The Stoics practiced daily self-examination. The Pythagoreans observed strict ethical disciplines. The Platonists engaged in exercises designed to turn the mind from sensible to intelligible realities. Philosophy was ascesis, spiritual training. Under Ammonius, Plotinus learned to do philosophy not just with mind, but with entire being. To think precisely while experiencing deeply. To maintain intellectual rigor while opening to levels of awareness beyond intellect. To analyze reality's structure while transforming consciousness's structure. Alexandria was the perfect environment for such training. Egyptian mysteries were accessible for those who sought them. Eastern wisdom traditions had filtered westward along trade routes. Jewish Kabbalistic teachings circulated in certain circles. Early Christian contemplatives practiced disciplines of prayer and meditation. Gnostic teachers offered cosmologies and soteriologies. Hermetic texts promised knowledge of divine mysteries. Plotinus absorbed all of this without being absorbed by any of it. He studied mystery religions without becoming an initiate. He examined Gnostic teachings without accepting their dualism. He explored various contemplative practices without abandoning philosophical rigor. What emerged was distinctly his own, a philosophical mysticism grounded in reason, yet opening toward the transrational. By his late 30s, Plotinus had accomplished what few philosophers achieve. A comprehensive vision integrating all aspects of reality, cosmology, psychology, ethics, aesthetics, metaphysics into a single coherent system. More remarkably, this vision was not just theoretical, but experiential. He had not merely thought about transcendence. He had tasted it, yet he had not taught. He had not written. He remained Ammonius's student, part of a small circle sworn to secrecy. The synthesis he had achieved existed only in his own mind, transmitted only through private discussion with fellow students. Then, around 242 AD, something shifted. The Emperor Gordian III was planning a military campaign against Persia. This was not merely politics. Persia was the east source of ancient wisdom traditions, home to Zoroastrian teachings, gateway to Indian philosophy. For a philosopher seeking to complete his understanding, To test Greek wisdom against Eastern teachings, this campaign offered an unprecedented opportunity. Plotinus made a fateful decision. He would join the expedition as a philosopher attached to the emperor's retinue. He would travel east to encounter wisdom traditions Greek philosophy had never fully absorbed. He would test his synthesis against the source traditions from which, some claimed, Greek philosophy itself had originally derived. He could not have known what would actually happen, how the expedition would fail, how the emperor would be murdered, how he would barely escape with his life. He could not have foreseen that this failed journey would redirect him from seeking wisdom to teaching it, from being a student to becoming a master. The decision to join Gordian's expedition was the hinge on which his life turned. Everything before was preparation. Everything after was fulfillment. He left Alexandria as a student. He would arrive in Rome as a philosopher. Ammonius speaks. What exactly did Ammonius Saccas teach his students? The question has haunted historians of philosophy for 17 centuries. No writings survived. The oath of secrecy was eventually broken, but by then the original teachings had been filtered through his students' own developments. We have only fragments, allusions, second-hand reports. Yet from these fragments, a picture emerges, and it is radical. Ammonius taught that Greek philosophy had lost something essential. The pre-Socratics had experienced reality directly. Heraclitus' logos was not just concept, but lived truth. Parmenides' being was not intellectual construction, but mystical apprehension. Plato had preserved this in his doctrine of forms, but later Platonists had reduced it to mere theory. Aristotle's brilliant analyses had made philosophy more rigorous, but perhaps less transformative. The task, Ammonius insisted, was recovery, not innovation, but remembrance. Not creating new philosophy, but recovering philosophy's original purpose. Transformation of consciousness, not just accumulation of knowledge. Sophia was not information about wisdom, but wisdom itself, a state of being, not a content of thought. This distinction was crucial. Information can be transmitted through texts. Wisdom requires transmission from person to person, teacher to student, in relationships where life shapes life. This was why Ammonius wrote nothing. The teaching could not be captured in words alone. It required presence, demonstration, the kind of learning that happens through prolonged contact with someone who embodies what they teach. Plotinus absorbed this completely. Later, when he finally began teaching, he would write. His student Porphyry would insist on it, but the written works would always be secondary. The real teaching happened in discussion, in questioning, in the transformation that occurred when a prepared student encountered a realized teacher. What were the core insights Ammonius passed to Plotinus? First, the supreme principle of reality is absolutely simple. It cannot be grasped by analysis because analysis requires multiplicity: subject and object, knower and known, concept and referent. The one is prior to all these distinctions. It is not even one in the sense of a number, because that would already introduce multiplicity. It is beyond all categories, all names, all concepts. We can speak of it only through negation and metaphor. This was not agnosticism. Rather, it was recognition that ultimate reality transcends the categories through which we normally understand. We can know it, but not through the usual means of knowledge. We can experience it, but not as an object of experience. We can be unified with it, but only by transcending our ordinary sense of separate selfhood. Second, reality is hierarchical. This was Ammonius's great synthesis of Plato and Aristotle. Plato was right. There are transcendent realities beyond the physical. Aristotle was right. The physical world is real, illusory. The reconciliation lies in recognizing levels or grades of being. The one is most real. From it emanates intellect, Plato's realm of forms, the level of eternal archetypes. From intellect emanates soul, the principle of life, motion, individual existence. From soul comes the material world, the lowest level, most distant from the source, yet still real in its way. This was not spatial hierarchy. Higher and lower are metaphors for degrees of unity, simplicity, and reality. The one is highest because most unified. Matter is lowest because most fragmented. Between them, graduated levels of being. Crucially, this hierarchy is dynamic, not static. Reality is not a frozen structure, but an ongoing process. The one perpetually overflows into intellect, intellect into soul, soul into matter, like light emanating from a source, diminishing in intensity as it spreads, but never separate from the source. And simultaneously, there is return. The soul can ascend back through the levels to its source. Third, The human self is not simple but complex, multiple levels corresponding to the levels of reality. We are simultaneously material body, living organism, rational soul, and potential union with intellect, and even the one. Most people identify with the lowest levels: body, emotions, surface thoughts. Philosophy is the practice of identifying with higher levels, recognizing that the true self is not the temporary personality, but the eternal soul. This was not dualism in the Gnostic sense. Ammonius rejected the idea that matter is evil or that the body is a prison. Matter is simply the furthest extension of reality's emanation, distant from the source, but not opposed to it. The body is not the enemy, but the lowest manifestation of the soul's creative activity. The task is not to escape the body, but to remember what we are beyond the body. Fourth, virtue is not merely ethical behavior, but ontological transformation. The traditional Greek virtues, courage, temperance, justice, wisdom, exist at multiple levels. At the lowest level, they are habits of behavior. At the political level, they structure social relationships. At the purificatory level, they cleanse the soul of attachments. At the contemplative level, they become qualities of consciousness itself. The highest virtue is assimilation to the divine, not imitation of a distant God, but realization of what the soul already is in its depths. This hierarchical understanding of virtue was revolutionary. It meant that ethics is not separate from metaphysics. How we should live depends on what we truly are. And what we truly are is discovered through philosophy, just intellectual philosophy, but lived practice that transforms consciousness. Fifth, beauty is not subjective preference, but objective recognition. When we perceive something as beautiful, we are not projecting our tastes onto neutral objects. We are recognizing unity, proportion, form, qualities that reflect higher realities. The beautiful object participates in the form of beauty, which itself is an aspect of intellect, which emanates from the one. To be moved by beauty is to be reminded of our source. Aesthetic experience can be a path to philosophical realization. This idea would become central to Plotinus's own teaching. Beauty would be the pathway, the ladder from physical to spiritual, from multiplicity to unity. It would be the accessible entry point for philosophical transformation, available to anyone who has experienced being arrested by beauty, that strange recognition that something material is revealing something beyond matter. Sixth, philosophy requires preparation. Not everyone is ready for these teachings. The soul must first be purified of gross attachments, the mind trained in logical thinking, attention cultivated through contemplative practice. This was why Ammonius maintained a small circle rather than teaching publicly. This was why he demanded an oath of secrecy. The teachings could be misunderstood, trivialized, distorted if transmitted prematurely. Plotinus absorbed this caution. Later, he would teach anyone who came sincerely seeking, but he would also recognize that people approach philosophy at different levels. Some need ethical guidance, some need intellectual clarification, some are ready for mystical practice. The teacher must recognize where the student is and meet them there, then gradually lead them higher. For 11 years, Plotinus studied under Ammonius. 11 years of reading Plato so deeply that the dialogues became transparent, revealing the living philosophy behind the texts. 11 years of training, attention, learning to sustain contemplation on intelligible realities, rather than being dragged by senses into constant distraction. 11 years of philosophical discussion, refining arguments, testing insights against objections, but also, and Porphyry hints at this, 11 years of contemplative practice that sometimes broke through into direct experience. Moments when the careful intellectual construction would suddenly become lived reality. When the one, discussed so often as abstract principle, would become immediate presence. When the self, analyzed as hierarchical structure, would be experienced as such, the surface personality recognized as surface, and something deeper, vaster, realized as one's true identity. These experiences were rare. They required extensive preparation. They couldn't be forced or manufactured, but they were the goal toward which everything pointed. Without them, philosophy remained abstract. With them, philosophy became revelation. By 242 AD, Plotinus had received everything Ammonius could teach. He had mastered Greek philosophy. He had developed contemplative capacity. He had experienced glimpses of the realities philosophy described. But something was incomplete. Greek philosophy, however profound, was still Greek. Wisdom traditions existed elsewhere, in Persia, in India, in the mysterious East, that had shaped Zoroaster and perhaps influenced Pythagoras himself. When the opportunity came to join Gordian's expedition eastward, Plotinus seized it. It would prove to be both disaster and liberation. Persian wisdom. The expedition was doomed from the start. Emperor Gordian III was young, inexperienced, manipulated by his Praetorian prefect Philip the Arab. The army was massive but poorly supplied. The route through Mesopotamia was hostile. The Persian Empire under Shapur was resurgent, powerful, ready to defend its territories. Plotinus was now 38 years old. He traveled with the army not as soldier, but as philosopher, part of the emperor's intellectual retinue, there to observe, learn, and potentially establish contact with Persian philosophers and magi. The mission was cultural as much as military, to understand the wisdom of the East that Greeks had long heard about, but rarely encountered directly. Ancient traditions spoke of Eastern origins for Greek philosophy. Pythagoras was said to have traveled to Egypt and Babylon. The Magi, Persian Zoroastrian priests, were legendary for their wisdom. Indian gymnosophists, naked philosophers, were rumored to possess profound teachings about consciousness and reality. If these traditions could be accessed, if their teachings could be compared with Greek philosophy, perhaps the synthesis could be completed. The expedition departed from Antioch in 43 AD. The army moved east through Syria into Mesopotamia, toward the heartland of the Persian Empire. Initial successes gave way to difficulties. Supply lines stretched. Disease spread. The Persians employed scorched earth tactics, destroying resources before the Roman army could seize them. By 244 AD, the campaign was failing. The army reached Mesopotamia, but could not break Persian resistance. Morale collapsed. Mutiny threatened. In February 244, near Zayda on the Euphrates, disaster struck. Gordian III was killed, murdered by his own troops, according to some accounts, fallen in battle, according to others. Philip the Arab, the Praetorian prefect, was immediately proclaimed emperor by the army. Philip quickly negotiated peace with Persia, a humiliating treaty that paid enormous tribute and ceded territory. The army began the long retreat westward. The expedition had failed completely. No Persian wisdom had been acquired. No contact with Eastern sages had been made. Instead, chaos, defeat, death. For Plotinus, the disaster was profound. He barely escaped with his life. As the army disintegrated and rival factions fought for control, philosophers attached to the expedition became vulnerable. Some were killed, others were captured. Plotinus fled south toward Antioch, traveling with refugees and scattered troops, constantly in danger. The retreat took months. Plotinus arrived back in Antioch in 245 AD, traumatized by the experience, his body weakened by disease and malnutrition. His mission to encounter Eastern wisdom utterly failed. He was now 40 years old. His teacher Ammonius Saccas had likely died by this time. His fellow students from Alexandria were scattered. He had spent 13 years preparing for a journey that ended in catastrophe. Yet catastrophe can be clarifying. The failed expedition taught Plotinus something crucial. Wisdom is not geographical. Truth is not discovered by traveling to exotic locations, but by traveling inward. The East, he sought, was not Persia or India, but the eternal East of consciousness itself, the source from which all wisdom traditions, East and West, ultimately derive. This realization was liberating. He no longer needed to compare Greek philosophy with Persian teachings to validate it. Greek philosophy, properly understood through Ammonius's synthesis, already contained everything necessary. Plato had not borrowed from the East. Plato had reached the same truths through the universal capacity of philosophical contemplation. The one that Plotinus sought was not Persian or Greek, but prior to all cultural divisions. From Antioch, Plotinus made his way to Rome. Why Rome? Perhaps because it was the center of the empire, where influential people gathered, where a philosopher might find students and patrons. Perhaps because Alexandria held too many memories of his student years, while Rome represented new beginning. Perhaps simply because Rome was where the path led. He arrived in Rome in 246 at middle-aged, unknown, carrying nothing but his philosophical training and his failure to find wisdom in the East. Rome in the 240s was not the confident imperial capital of earlier centuries. It was a city nervous about its future, aware that the frontiers were crumbling, that emperors came and went with terrifying rapidity, that the certainties of the Pax Romana had evaporated. Yet Rome still attracted intellectuals, philosophers, spiritual seekers. Multiple philosophical schools operated. Stoicism remained influential among the educated classes. Various mystery religions offered initiations. Christian communities were growing despite periodic persecutions. Gnostic teachers attracted followers with their elaborate cosmologies. The air was thick with competing visions of reality and salvation. In this philosophical marketplace, Plotinus entered quietly. He did not immediately begin teaching. For several years, he observed, listened, attended lectures given by other philosophers, assessed the intellectual landscape. He had spent 13 years as a student, and nearly 3 years on a failed expedition. Perhaps patience was now appropriate. Perhaps the right moment for teaching would reveal itself. When he did begin teaching, around 253 AD, he was nearly 50 years old. He gathered a small circle of students not through public advertisement, but through quiet reputation. Those who came were serious seekers, not casual students. They included Emilius, who would become his most devoted philosophical disciple, staying with him for 24 years and producing extensive commentaries on his teachings. Porphyry of Tyre, who would arrive later but become Plotinus's editor, biographer, and the primary reason we know anything about him. Porphyry would organize Plotinus's scattered writings into the Ennead's 6 groups of 9 treatises each and write the life of Plotinus that remains our main biographical source. Several Roman senators, including Rogationus, who renounced his wealth and political career to pursue philosophy, Castricius, who became a trusted friend and advisor, women students, unusual for the time, including Gemina, in whose house Plotinus lived, and her daughter Gemina, whom Plotinus treated as his own child. The circle was intimate, intense, transformative. Plotinus taught through discussion rather than lecture. Students would raise questions, propose interpretations of Plato, challenge each other's understanding. Plotinus would guide the discussion, clarify confusions, push thinking deeper. The goal was not to transmit information, but to catalyze realization. For the first 10 years of teaching, Plotinus wrote nothing. The teaching was entirely oral. This was consistent with Ammonius's approach, and with Plotinus's conviction that philosophy is lived rather than merely studied. Writing fixes ideas, makes them seem complete when understanding should remain dynamic. Oral teaching adapts to each student, meets them where they are. But Porphyry, when he arrived into 63 AD, saw the problem. Plotinus was now nearly 60. His health was beginning to fail. The synthesis he had achieved, the profound insights he had developed, existed only in his students' memories and notes. If he died without writing, much would be lost. Future generations would have no access to this wisdom. Porphyry pressed Plotinus to write. At first, Plotinus resisted. Writing seemed secondary, even a distraction from real teaching. But eventually, he relented. Perhaps he recognized that his time was limited. Perhaps he saw that writing could extend his influence beyond the small circle who could study with him personally. Perhaps he simply trusted Porphyry's judgment. The writing began slowly. Short treatises addressing questions his students had raised. Explorations of specific problems in Plato's philosophy. Refutations of Gnostic teachings that Plotinus considered distortions of truth. None of these were intended as systematic exposition. They were occasion pieces, responses to immediate situations. Yet within them, a comprehensive system began to emerge. Treatise by treatise, the full scope of Plotinus's philosophy revealed itself. A complete account of reality from the one to matter, from cosmology to psychology, from metaphysics to ethics, from aesthetics to mystical practice. Porphyry collected these writings carefully. He arranged them thematically rather than chronologically. He edited them lightly, clarifying obscurities but preserving Plotinus's distinctive style, dense, elusive, often difficult, assuming deep familiarity with Plato, yet also capable of sudden clarity and beauty. The failed Persian expedition had taught Plotinus that the journey outward is ultimately futile. The true journey is inward, upward through the levels of consciousness toward the source. Rome became not just the place he taught, but the symbol of his philosophy. The material capital of empire was where one learned to transcend material existence entirely. He would remain in Rome for the rest of his life, 24 years of teaching, writing, guiding students toward the realization he himself had achieved. The man who had sought wisdom in Persia would create, in the heart of the Roman Empire, the last great synthesis of ancient philosophy. Romans circled a house on the Esquiline Hill, became an unlikely center for philosophical transformation. It was not Plotinus's own house. He owned nothing, lived simply, accepting hospitality from students and patrons. But it was where his circle gathered daily, where philosophical discussions extended late into the night, where something more than normal education occurred. The teaching method was distinctive. Plotinus would begin by reading passages from Plato, usually the Parmenides, the Symposium, or the Republic. These were not lectures but conversations. Students interrupted with questions. Plotinus encouraged objections. The discussion would range across texts, connecting Platonic passages with Aristotelian arguments, bringing in Stoic ethics, referencing Pythagorean mathematics. But the goal was never mere exegesis. Plotinus was not interested in what Plato said, but in what Plato meant, and beyond that, in the reality Plato was attempting to articulate. The texts were occasions for philosophical thinking, not objects of scholarly analysis. When students became too focused on textual detail, Plotinus would push them beyond words toward the realities the words indicated. This approach sometimes frustrated students. Porphyry records that readings would be interrupted for days while a single question was explored from every angle. Plotinus refused to move forward until the current problem was resolved, not just intellectually, but experientially. He wanted students to see the truth, not just understand the argument. The circle included unusual people. Roman society was rigidly hierarchical: senators, equestrians, plebeians, slaves. Yet in Plotinus's school, such distinctions dissolved. What mattered was not social status but philosophical capacity. A senator might be a beginning student while a freedman demonstrated advanced understanding. Rogationus exemplified this transformation. He was a Roman senator with immense wealth and political influence. After studying with Plotinus, he renounced everything, gave away his property, resigned his senate seat, dismissed his servants, stopped eating meat. He lived in the homes of friends, possessing nothing but the clothes he wore. His health was terrible. He suffered from gout so severe he could barely walk. Yet Porphyry reports that Plotinus called him the true philosopher among them, because he had fully integrated the teaching that material existence is not where value resides. This was not asceticism as punishment or rejection of the body. It was clarification of priorities. Rogationus didn't hate his wealth. He simply recognized it as irrelevant to what truly mattered. He didn't despise his body. He acknowledged its transitory nature while identifying with something beyond it. The women in the circle were equally remarkable. Roman women of the upper classes had limited educational opportunities, yet several studied with Plotinus with full seriousness. Gamina, who hosted him, was not just a patron but a student. Her daughter, also named Gamina, was treated by Plotinus as a philosophical heir as much as any male student. When women in the circle faced the tension between philosophical vocation and social expectations of marriage and motherhood, Plotinus supported their philosophical choices without condemning social roles. This was unusual. Most philosophical schools were male-dominated. While some earlier philosophers like Pythagoras had included women, by the 3rd century it was rare. Plotinus's inclusiveness wasn't ideological. He didn't argue for equality in modern terms. Rather, he simply recognized philosophical capacity wherever it appeared, regardless of gender, status, or origin. The teaching extended beyond formal discussions. Students observed how Plotinus lived his simplicity, his kindness, his complete lack of pretense. He ate plain food, wore simple clothing, owned nothing. Yet he wasn't ostentatiously ascetic. He didn't advertise his renunciation. He simply lived as if material accumulation were pointless, which for him it was. His kindness was legendary. Porphyry reports that many parents in Rome entrusted their orphan children to Plotinus as guardian. He managed their estates with meticulous care, ensuring nothing was lost. He settled disputes between students with wisdom that both sides accepted. He counseled those in psychological distress, offering not just philosophical wisdom, but genuine compassion. Yet he was also fierce when truth was at stake. When Gnostic teachers came to Rome claiming to offer secret wisdom superior to philosophy, Plotinus engaged them in debate with devastating effectiveness. He wrote several treatises later collected as Against the Gnostics, exposing what he saw as their philosophical confusions and ethical dangers. The Gnostics taught that the material world was created by an evil or ignorant deity, that the body is a prison, that salvation requires esoteric knowledge revealed only to the elect. Plotinus rejected all of this. The material world, he argued, is not evil, but the necessary final stage of reality's emanation. The body is not a prison, but the soul's self-chosen instrument. Knowledge of truth is available to anyone willing to do the philosophical work. There are no secrets, only degrees of understanding earned through progressive purification and contemplation. These debates were not merely academic. They concerned fundamentally different visions of reality. cosmos and human purpose. The Gnostic vision was dualistic: matter versus spirit, ignorance versus knowledge, demiurge versus true God. Plotinus's vision was monistic: one reality in graduated levels, one truth accessible through reason and contemplation, one source from which everything flows and toward which everything can return. His students absorbed not just arguments, but a way of being in the world. Plotinus demonstrated that philosophical realization doesn't require withdrawal from ordinary life. He lived in the city, engaged with society, took responsibility for children, managed property, wrote letters, received visitors. Philosophy didn't mean escape, but transformation of how one engages with the inevitable facts of embodied existence. The daily rhythm of the school was structured yet flexible. Mornings often involved silent meditation or contemplative reading. Midday brought discussions, sometimes lasting hours. Evenings were for communal meals, simple food, philosophical conversation, occasional readings from poets or historians. Students lived nearby, some in the same house, creating a community bound not by rules, but by shared aspiration toward wisdom. Plotinus also maintained relationships beyond his immediate circle. He corresponded with philosophers in other cities. He advised political figures on matters of governance and justice. At one point, he proposed establishing a Platonopolis, a city organized according to Platonic principles, where philosophers would demonstrate that wisdom could structure practical life. The Emperor Gallienus was interested, but opposition from courtiers blocked the project. Plotinus accepted the failure without bitterness. The external city was less important than the internal city, the soul properly ordered according to reason, which anyone could achieve regardless of political circumstances. His reputation grew slowly but steadily. By the 260s, people throughout the empire knew of the philosopher in Rome who taught Platonic wisdom combined with mystical practice. Students came from Egypt, Syria, Greece, North Africa. Some stayed for years. Others visited briefly, then returned home to teach what they had learned. Yet Plotinus never sought fame. He avoided public lectures, preferring intimate discussion. He refused to have his portrait painted or sculpted. When a friend tried to commission an artist, Plotinus asked, "Is it not enough to carry around this image in which nature has enclosed us? Do you really think I must also consent to leave?" As a desirable spectacle for posterity, an image of the image? For him, the physical appearance was already an imperfect image of the true self. Why multiply images of images? This was not false modesty, but consistent philosophy. If the true self is not the body but the soul, then obsession with physical appearance is confusion. The self-worth preserving is not captured in portraits. It is transmitted through teaching, realized through practice, perpetuated when students achieve the same transformation their teacher achieved. By the mid-60s, Plotinus was in his 60s. His health, never robust, was declining. He had some kind of chronic illness, possibly leprosy, possibly a severe skin condition, possibly something else. He refused to let physicians examine him, considering such attention to the body unphilosophical. His voice weakened, his stamina diminished, yet his intellectual power remained extraordinary. The treatises he wrote in his final years are among his most profound: on the nature of eternity, on contemplation as creative principle, on the transcendence of the one. As his body failed, his philosophical vision sharpened. The approaching death, rather than terrifying him, seemed to clarify what he had always taught, that the soul is not identical with the body, that death is transition rather than ending, that what is eternal in us cannot die. The circle around him intensified their studies. Sensing their time with him was limited. These final years would produce his deepest teachings and test whether his philosophy was merely intellectual construction or living wisdom capable of sustaining him through the ultimate challenge of mortality. The one at the foundation of Plotinus's entire philosophy stands a principle so simple it defies description: the one. Not the one God in any theistic sense, not even the one as if it were a thing among other things. Simply, one. Absolute unity prior to all multiplicity. The source from which everything flows, but which itself flows from nothing. To speak of the one is already to falsify it. Language requires multiplicity: subject and predicate, noun and verb, signifier and signified. But the one is prior to these distinctions. It is not a being. It is beyond being. It is not essence. It is beyond essence. It does not exist. It is the source of existence. Plotinus knew this was paradoxical. How do we think about what transcends thought? How do we speak about what transcends speech? His solution was dialectical. We approach the one through negation and metaphor, constantly correcting our formulations, using language to point beyond language. The primary metaphor is light. The one is like a light source, the sun. Just as the sun pours forth light without diminishing itself, without choosing to illuminate, simply by being what it is, so the one emanates reality without intention, without loss, without change. Light spreads from the sun in graduated intensity, bright near the source, dimmer farther away. Similarly, reality flows from the one in graduated levels, closer levels more unified and real, farther levels more fragmented and less real. This emanation is not temporal. The one did not create the universe at some point in time. Emanation is eternal, continuous, necessary. The one cannot not emanate, just as the sun cannot not shine. Emanation is not an act of will but an overflow of perfection. The one is so utterly complete that its very perfection generates everything else, not through deliberation or decision, but through the inner necessity of absolute sufficiency. Why does the one emanate? This question already misunderstands. Why implies purpose, which implies lack, which implies imperfection. The one has no purpose because it lacks nothing. It doesn't emanate in order to achieve something. It emanates because that is what perfect unity does. It overflows. Being perfectly itself is identical with generating everything else. The first emanation from the one is intellect, nous in Greek. This is not yet multiplicity as we know it, but it is the first departure from absolute unity. Intellect is the realm of forms, Plato's eternal archetypes. But Plotinus radically reinterprets Plato. The forms are not separate from intellect. They are intellect's self-thinking. Intellect is living thought, thinking itself eternally, simultaneously thinker, thinking, and thought, perfectly unified, yet also distinguished as subject, act, and object. This is the first fall from absolute unity, though fall is misleading. Intellect is not a mistake or degradation, but the necessary first expression of the one. It is less unified than the one. It contains distinction between thinker and thought, but it is still supremely unified compared to what follows. All the forms exist eternally in intellect: beauty, justice, goodness, triangle, human being, horse, every universal that structures reality. From intellect emanates soul, psyche. Soul is the principle of life, motion, individual existence. While intellect is eternal and unchanging, soul is temporal and dynamic. Soul mediates between the eternal realm of forms and the temporal realm of material existence. It looks upward toward intellect, contemplating the forms, and downward toward matter, imposing form on formlessness, generating the physical cosmos. Soul exists at multiple levels. There is the world soul, the unitary principle that animates the entire cosmos as a single living organism. There are individual souls, every conscious being. These are not entirely separate from the world soul, but rather particularizations of it, like light differentiated into individual beams, yet all coming from one source. Here Plotinus makes a crucial move. Individual souls never entirely descend into matter. The highest part of the soul remains eternally in the intelligible realm, always contemplating intellect, always connected to its source. We are unaware of this because our attention is captured by the lower levels, by sensations, emotions, bodily concerns. But the deepest part of us never fell, never became ignorant, never stopped contemplating truth. This doctrine would prove controversial even among Plotinus's students. It seems to imply that our ignorance is somehow voluntary. We could be aware of our eternal nature if we simply redirected attention. Porphyry would modify this doctrine, suggesting that souls do fully descend. But Plotinus insisted, we are not fundamentally fallen beings needing rescue from outside. We are eternal beings who have forgotten what we are. Philosophy is remembrance. From soul emanates matter, but matter is not substance in its own right. It is absolute privation, the limit of emanation, the point where the one's creative overflow finally exhausts itself into non-being. Matter is not evil in any moral sense, but it is the lowest level of reality, the maximum distance from the source, the realm of maximum fragmentation and minimum unity. Material objects are compounds of form and matter, soul imposing intelligible structures from intellect onto the formless receptacle of matter. A horse is the form of horse residing in intellect, expressed through soul's activity in matter. When the horse dies, the matter remains, but the form withdraws. The form never truly became material, it was only reflected in matter temporarily. This entire structure, one, intellect, Soul, latter, is hierarchical. But the hierarchy is not spatial or temporal. Higher and lower are metaphors for degrees of unity, reality, and independence. The one is higher because most unified, most real, most independent. Matter is lower because most fragmented, least real, most dependent. The levels are not places, but states of being. Moreover, the levels interpenetrate. The one is not somewhere else. It is the most interior core of everything. Intellect is not in another realm. It is the intelligible structure of this realm. Soul is not separate from bodies. It is what makes bodies alive. Matter is not an alien substance. It is the necessary ground for the expression of forms in multiplicity and change. This vision solved multiple philosophical problems that had plagued Greek thought. The problem of transcendence and immanence. God the One is both utterly transcendent beyond all categories, unaffected by the world, and radically immanent, the innermost reality of everything. These are not contradictory but complementary ways of describing reality's structure. The problem of evil. If the One is perfect, why does evil exist? Plotinus's answer: evil is not a positive force, but privation, the necessary consequence of emanation extending to the point of maximum distance from the source. Matter itself is not evil, but the soul's excessive attachment to matter, forgetting its true nature, constitutes moral evil. Evil is not something the One creates, but something that emerges at the limit of creation. The problem of divine knowledge. If God knows the world, doesn't that make God dependent on the world, therefore imperfect? Plotinus's answer: the One doesn't know anything, not even itself, because knowledge requires the duality of knower and known. Intellect knows perfectly, timelessly, completely because it is structured as knowing, but the One is beyond even this. The problem of free will. Are we truly free, or is everything determined by the One? Plotinus's answer: at the highest level, the One's emanation is necessary. But souls, as intermediate beings, have genuine freedom, the ability to orient attention either toward intellect ascending toward our source, or toward matter descending into fragmentation. We are neither absolutely free nor absolutely determined, but free within the structure of reality's emanation. This metaphysical vision was not meant as abstract theory. It was a map. Plotinus taught it so that souls could orient themselves, recognize where they are in the hierarchy, and realize that ascent is possible. The One is not distant. It is the ground of our being. The journey home is not through space, but through consciousness, shifting attention from lower to higher levels of our own nature. The question then becomes, how? If the One is beyond thought, how do we achieve union with it? If our true self is not the surface personality, but the eternal soul, how do we identify with that rather than this? If reality is hierarchical, how do we ascend? The answer lies in what Plotinus calls contemplation, not as passive observation, but as active transformation of consciousness itself. This would be the practical heart of his teaching, the method by which philosophy becomes realization. Descending light. The metaphor of light was not decoration for Plotinus. It was the key to understanding how reality works. Light descends from its source, diminishing in intensity, but never ceasing to be light. Similarly, reality descends from the One through graduated levels, each level less unified than the one above, but all connected in a continuous cascade of being. This doctrine of emanation was Plotinus's most original contribution to philosophy. Neither Plato nor Aristotle had articulated it clearly. Plato described the forms as separate from the material world, but couldn't explain how they related to it. Aristotle made forms immanent in things, but lost the transcendent dimension. Plotinus synthesized both. Forms are transcendent, existing eternally in intellect, and immanent, expressed through soul's activity in matter. Intellect emanates from the One not through the One's decision, but through what Plotinus calls tolma, kind of ontological boldness or daring. Intellect is the One knowing itself, but since the One is beyond all distinction, this knowing requires a subtle duality, knower and known, even though they are the same. This is the first movement away from absolute unity, the first distinction, the first multiplicity. Yet intellect remains supremely unified. All the forms exist in it as a single organic whole, not separate from each other, not arranged in space, not distributed in time. In intellect, every form contains all other forms. The form of beauty contains justice, goodness, triangle, human being. How? Because they are all aspects of the One's self-expression. always that unity and multiplicity can be. Intellect is like a vast living organism where every part contains the whole. This is difficult to grasp because our minds operate sequentially. We think one thought, then another, then another. But intellect doesn't think sequentially, it thinks all truths simultaneously, eternally. When we know mathematical truth, we aren't creating it or discovering it in time. We are participating in intellect's eternal knowledge. When we grasp beauty or justice, we aren't inventing these concepts. We are recognizing realities that always exist in intellect. Soul emanates from intellect through a similar process. Soul is intellect contemplating itself, but doing so with less intensity, less unity. If intellect is light at the source, soul is light slightly dimmed. Soul turns partially downward toward matter, introducing the temporal dimension. While intellect is purely eternal, soul operates in both eternity and time. Its highest aspect remains in eternity, but its lower aspects engage with temporal becoming. This dual nature of soul is crucial. We are souls, which means we participate simultaneously in two realms. Our true nature is eternal, but our expression is temporal. We exist in time, but are not of time. The body ages, but the soul doesn't age. It simply experiences temporal sequence while remaining itself beyond time. The world soul generates the physical cosmos by contemplating the forms in intellect and impressing them on matter. This is not conscious design in the human sense. The world soul doesn't deliberate about how to make a horse or a tree. Rather, by contemplating the forms, it spontaneously generates physical instances. The cosmos is the world soul's contemplation made visible. What would be purely intelligible in intellect becomes sensible through soul's creative activity. Individual souls are particularizations of the world soul. This is perhaps Plotinus's most difficult doctrine. In what sense are we individual? And in what sense are we unified with all other souls? His answer is subtle. At the highest level, there is only soul, one unified principle. Individual souls are this one soul viewed from different perspectives, operating through different bodies, experiencing different histories. We are not separate pieces of soul, but rather soul manifesting multiplied. The analogy Plotinus uses is of theorems in geometry. Is the Pythagorean theorem something different in your mind versus mine? In one sense, yes, you understand it at this time and place. I understand it at another time and place. But in another sense, no, we both grasp the same eternal truth. Similarly, souls are different in their particular expressions, but the same in their essential nature. This has profound implications. If all souls are fundamentally one, then harming another is ultimately harming oneself. Not metaphorically, but literally. The separation we experience is real at the level of embodied existence, but illusory at the level of essential being. Ethics is not about following rules imposed from outside, but about recognizing reality's true structure, that we are not isolated atoms, but interconnected manifestations of one living whole. Matter occupies a peculiar position in this hierarchy. It is not exactly nothing, but it is as close to nothing as something can be. Plotinus uses the term hypokaimenon, the ultimate substrate, the receptacle that receives form but has no form itself. Matter is pure potentiality without actuality, pure receptivity without activity. Is matter evil? Gnostic teachers said yes, matter is the creation of an evil or ignorant deity, and salvation means escaping material existence entirely. Plotinus firmly rejected this. Matter is not evil. It is simply the limit of emanation, the point where reality's creative overflow reaches its maximum extension. Matter is necessary for the cosmos to be complete, for all possible levels of being to exist. Evil enters not through matter's existence, but through the soul's excessive attachment to matter, forgetting its true nature. When the soul identifies entirely with the body, when it becomes absorbed in material concerns and sensory pleasures, when it loses awareness of its eternal nature, this is moral evil. Not matter itself, but the soul's confusion about where it belongs in the hierarchy. This has ethical implications. The good life is not about despising the body or rejecting material existence. It is about proper ordering, recognizing that the body is the soul's instrument, not its essence. That material goods are useful, but not ultimate. That sensory experience can be enjoyed, but shouldn't become the focus of attention. Plotinus himself demonstrated this balance. He lived simply, but not ostentatiously, ascetically. He ate, dressed, engaged in social life, but without attachment. without making these things central. He cared for orphans' property meticulously. Material affairs matter and should be handled responsibly, but he didn't identify his worth with material possessions. The entire emanation one to intellect to soul to matter forms what Plotinus calls cosmos, an ordered whole, a hierarchy of beauty. Each level is appropriate to its place. Matter is not as beautiful as soul, soul not as beautiful as intellect, intellect not as beautiful as the one. But each level manifests beauty in its own way. Even matter, the lowest level, reflects the one's creative overflow, distant, dim, fragmented, but still part of the whole. This vision is optimistic without being naive. Yes, there is suffering, evil, fragmentation in the material world. But these are not ultimate realities, they are the inevitable consequences of emanation extending to its limit. The cosmos is the best possible cosmos, not because nothing bad happens in it, but because it manifests all possible levels of being, from the highest unity to the lowest multiplicity. Moreover, the descent is not final. Plotinus's metaphysics is not only a cascade downward, but also a path upward. Just as reality emanates from the one, so souls can return to the one. The light descends, but it also draws everything back toward its source. Every being, knowingly or not, seeks the one, seeks unity, completion, learn to the origin. This upward path is not inevitable. Matter doesn't ascend, it remains as the necessary ground of material existence. But souls can ascend, and ascending is their natural telos, their proper end. We are not meant to remain identified with the body, absorbed in material concerns, forgetful of our source. We are meant to remember, to turn inward and upward, to reverse the descent through conscious effort. How? Through what Plotinus calls contemplation, not passive observation, but active transformation of consciousness. Through purification, concentration, and progressive identification with higher levels of our being. Through philosophy as spiritual practice. The descending light shows us reality's structure, but reality's structure is also the roadmap for return. Understanding emanation is the first step in reversing it, in climbing back up the ladder from matter through soul to intellect, and finally to union with the one, or ascent. The philosophy of the one was not meant to be contemplated abstractly. It was a roadmap for actual transformation. Plotinus taught a method, a systematic practice for ascending through the levels of reality back toward the source. This was philosophy as ascesis, as spiritual discipline, as the art of dying before death, so that death, when it came, would be merely continuation of what had already been practiced. The path begins with ethics, not rules imposed from outside, but recognition of what the soul truly is. Plotinus identified 4 levels of virtue, each corresponding to a level of the soul's ascent. Political virtues. These are the basic moral qualities that allow society to function: courage, temperance, justice, prudence. Most people operate at this level, following ethical norms because they understand their practical necessity. These virtues are necessary but insufficient. They order the external life without transforming internal consciousness. Purificatory virtues. At this level, virtue becomes a means of detachment. The goal is not just to act courageously or temperately, but to purify the soul of excessive attachment to material concerns. This isn't asceticism for its own sake, but recognition that attachment to the mutable causes suffering. The soul learns to enjoy material goods without depending on them, to participate in physical existence without identifying with it. Contemplative virtues. Here virtue is no longer about action, but about vision. The soul that has purified itself of gross attachments begins to see intelligible realities. Justice is no longer just fair behavior, but recognition of reality's true order. Wisdom is no longer just practical intelligence, but direct apprehension of truth. The virtues become qualities of consciousness rather than patterns of behavior. Paradigmatic virtues. These exist in intellect itself, virtue not as human achievement, but as eternal reality. The contemplative soul doesn't just practice virtue, it becomes virtue by identifying completely with intellect, where these qualities exist perfectly and eternally. The progression is clear, from external behavior to internal detachment, to conscious vision to ontological identification. Each level doesn't replace the previous one, but incorporates and transcends it. The philosopher still acts justly in the political sense, while simultaneously existing in contemplative union with justice itself. After ethical purification comes intellectual discipline. The soul must train attention. Normally, consciousness is dragged constantly toward the external sights, sounds, bodily sensations, emotions, fleeting thoughts. This outward dispersal of attention is the fundamental condition of human forgetfulness. We forget what we are because we're constantly focused on what we're not. Plotinus taught practices for reversing this habitual direction of attention. Some were philosophical, sustained contemplation on intelligible rather than sensible realities. Instead of thinking about particular beautiful things, think about beauty itself. Instead of examining individual just acts, contemplate justice itself. Instead of noting temporal changes, focus on the eternal truths that remain unchanged. Other practices were more directly contemplative. Plotinus taught what later traditions would call meditation, sustained one-pointed concentration, withdrawal of attention from senses, cultivation of interior stillness. This was not emptying the mind, but filling it with intelligible reality, gradually replacing the multiplicity of sensory experience with the unity of intellectual vision. The goal was to shift identity itself. Most people identify with the surface self, the personality, the body, the stream of thoughts and feelings. But this surface self is not the true self. It is merely the lowest aspect of the soul, the part engaged with material existence. The true self is deeper, the rational soul that thinks, and beyond that, the intuitive intellect that knows directly without reasoning. Plotinus used the metaphor of awakening. Ordinary consciousness is like dreaming. We take the dream world as real, identify with the dream character, forget that we are the dreamer. Philosophy is waking up while still in the dream, recognizing that the dream character is not our true identity. The body is a dream. The personality is a dream. The thoughts and emotions are dreams. What dreams them the soul, that is what we truly are. This recognition doesn't happen all at once. It comes in stages, in glimpses. The soul experiences moments of clarity, sudden awareness of existing beyond the body, of thinking from a place not located in physical space, of being the consciousness that witnesses thoughts rather than the thoughts themselves. These moments are preliminary, not yet the final union, but preparation for it. As practice deepens, these moments stabilize and extend. What was glimpsed occasionally becomes the primary orientation. The soul lives increasingly from its higher aspects, thinking primarily about intelligible realities, making decisions from rational understanding rather than emotional reaction, maintaining equanimity regardless of external circumstances. This is the level of the sage or philosopher in Plotinus's technical sense. The sage has achieved stable identification with the rational soul. External fortune cannot disturb him because his identity is not invested in external circumstances. Physical pleasure and pain still occur, the body still feels, but these sensations are like events happening to something external, to oneself. The sage experiences pain the way we experience pain in a fingernail reel, but not threatening to core identity. Yet even this is not the summit. The rational soul still operates through discursive thought, reasoning step by step, analyzing, comparing. Beyond this lies intuitive intellect, direct knowing without the mediation of concepts. Intellect doesn't think about truth. It is truth thinking itself. To identify with intellect is to experience knowledge not as possession but as being. The transition from rational soul to intellect is subtle. It happens when thinking becomes so concentrated, so unified, so intensely focused, that the distinction between thinker and thought collapses. You're no longer someone who knows truth. You are truth, knowing itself. Subject and object merge. The duality required for ordinary knowledge disappears into a higher unity that is simultaneously knowing and being. This is not unconsciousness. It is superconsciousness awareness, so complete it transcends the subject-object duality of normal awareness. Plotinus is careful about this. The mystical state is not loss of consciousness, but transformation of consciousness into a mode beyond ordinary awareness. At this level, the soul exists as intellect, thinking all thoughts simultaneously, knowing all forms directly, experiencing reality as a unified whole where every part contains every other part. This is the level at which Plotinus himself frequently operated, especially during periods of sustained contemplation. Porphyry reports that Plotinus's face would sometimes become luminous during discussions, as if the inner vision were becoming visible. Yet even intellect is not the absolute summit. Beyond intellect lies the one, and achieving union with the one acquires going beyond even the distinction between knowing and being. This is henosis, the mystical union that Plotinus experienced 4 times in his life, according to Porphyry. How does one move from intellect to the one? Not through any effort of thought, because the one is beyond thought. Not through any effort of will, because the will itself must be transcended. The approach to the one is by simplification, progressively releasing all multiplicity until only unity remains. Plotinus described it as a kind of awakening within awakening. First you wake from bodily identification to rational soul. Then you wake from discursive thinking to intuitive intellect. Then you wake from even this to something prior to the distinction between knower and known. What remains when all distinctions cease? Not nothing. Emptiness would still be a kind of content. Rather, pure presence, absolute simplicity, the source that is prior to all manifestation. The experience is ineffable. Plotinus tried to describe it using paradoxes: being while beyond being, knowing while beyond knowledge, presence while beyond presence. Language fails because language requires multiplicity: subject, verb, object, but the one is prior to all such distinctions. When asked what the experience was like, Plotinus could only say, not two but one. Not the experience of union but union itself, prior to the division of experiencer and experienced. A mergence so complete that nothing separate remains to report the mergence. Only afterward, when consciousness returns to normal duality, can one reflect and realize that happened, though that and happened falsify what occurred by introducing temporal and objective categories that weren't present in the experience itself. This was the summit of the inner ascent, not once and for all but momentarily, as grace more than achievement, as gift that couldn't be forced, but only prepared for through the systematic practices of purification, concentration, and contemplation. Beauty's truth for most people. The path to philosophy begins not with abstract metaphysics, but with concrete experience. Plotinus recognized this. He knew that few souls would be drawn to philosophy by hearing about the one's absolute transcendence. But almost everyone has experienced beauty, that arresting moment when something seen or heard or encountered stops the normal flow of consciousness and commands attention. Beauty was Plotinus's gateway, the accessible entry point to his entire philosophical system. His treatise on beauty, Ennead I. 6, is a masterpiece of philosophical analysis wedded to lyrical description, demonstrating how aesthetic experience can become a ladder for metaphysical ascent. He began by attacking the prevailing theory. Most philosophers, following Stoic aesthetics, claimed that beauty is symmetry, proper proportion of parts to whole, mathematical harmony, balanced arrangement. A face is beautiful because the features are proportioned correctly. A building is beautiful because its dimensions follow geometric ratios. Music is beautiful because of harmonic intervals. Plotinus acknowledged that symmetry often accompanies beauty, but symmetry cannot be beauty's essence. Why? Because simple things can be beautiful: a single color, a single tone, shaft of sunlight. These have no parts to be proportioned, yet they're beautiful. Moreover, the same proportions can appear beautiful or ugly depending on context. The explanation must be deeper than mere arrangement. Plotinus proposed a radical alternative. Beauty is the presence of form overwhelming matter. When we perceive something as beautiful, we are responding to unity imposing itself on multiplicity, intelligible form manifesting through sensible medium, soul's creative activity making itself visible. A beautiful face is not beautiful because of measurements, but because the soul's inner radiance is shining through physical features. The features are transparent to something beyond them, the living soul, which itself reflects higher realities. We are moved by beautiful faces not because of the flesh, but because of what the flesh reveals: life, consciousness, soul. Ultimately the one itself, cascading through levels of manifestation. This explains why beauty affects us emotionally and even spiritually. We're not just assessing proportions intellectually. We're experiencing recognition, the soul recognizing its own nature reflected back from material form. Beauty is the sensible made transparent to the intelligible. Matter revealing what transcends matter. Color provides a pure example. Why is gold beautiful? Not because of its proportions. Gold has no internal structure visible to sight. It's beautiful because of its quality, that specific warm luminosity. The beauty is in the color itself, which is a quality, not a quantity. Quality is closer to form, to the intelligible, than quantity. In beautiful color, we see form minimally obscured by matter, hence the intense aesthetic response. Music works similarly. A simple melody can be profoundly beautiful despite minimal complexity. Why? Because it manifests rhythm, proportion, unity and succession, temporal analogues of eternal realities. The soul responds to music's rhythm because the soul itself is rhythmic. It moves between eternity and time, unity and multiplicity, contemplation, and action. Beautiful music resonates with the soul's own nature, but physical beauty is only the beginning. Plotinus constructed a hierarchy of beauties corresponding to the metaphysical hierarchy. Physical beauty, beautiful bodies, colors, sounds the lowest level. Beauty most mixed with matter, yet still capable of arresting attention and turning the soul upward. Ethical beauty, beautiful actions, beautiful character, beautiful soul. Higher than physical because less dependent on matter. A generous act is beautiful not because of physical features, but because it manifests soul's proper orientation toward others. Virtue is beautiful because it is soul properly ordered, rational form imposed on irrational impulses. Intellectual beauty, beautiful sciences, beautiful knowledge, beautiful understanding. Mathematics is beautiful because it reveals necessary truths that transcend material instantiation. Philosophy is beautiful because it grasps reality's true structure. At this level, beauty is almost purely formal, almost entirely liberated from matter. Divine beauty, beauty itself. The form of beauty residing in intellect. Not beautiful because it participates in beauty, but beautiful in itself, the source of all particular beauties. This is beauty that cannot be seen with physical eyes, but only contemplated intellectually, yet it is more beautiful than anything physical precisely because it is beauty undiluted, beauty perfect, beauty eternal, the one beyond beauty. Strictly speaking, the one is not beautiful because beauty is already a form, and the one is beyond all forms. Yet the one is the source of beauty, that from which beauty's possibility flows. Sometimes Plotinus speaks of the one as the good, rather than the beautiful, indicating that it transcends even the category of beauty while being that which makes beauty desirable. This hierarchy is also a ladder. Physical beauty awakens the soul to beauty's existence. If properly understood, it prompts the question, why is this beautiful? Not just, what proportions does it have? But, what is beauty itself, such that this physical thing participates in it? This question begins philosophy. The soul that asks it seriously cannot be satisfied with physical beauty alone. It seeks the source of beauty, the form that physical things imperfectly manifest. This search leads from physics to ethics, beautiful actions, from ethics to epistemology, beautiful knowledge, from epistemology to metaphysics, beauty itself. Plotinus quoted Plato's Symposium extensively. Diotima's ladder of love from physical beauty to ethical beauty to intellectual beauty to absolute beauty was his model. But he deepened it by grounding it in his metaphysics. The latter is not arbitrary or merely psychological. It corresponds to reality's actual structure. Physical beauty truly does participate in higher beauty. Higher beauty truly does exist in intellect. Intellect truly does flow from the one. Therefore, the aesthetic experience, properly understood and followed, is a legitimate path to truth. Not the only path. Philosophical reasoning and ethical purification are equally valid. But for those moved primarily by beauty, aesthetic experience can become contemplative practice. The lover of beauty should not stop at enjoying beautiful things. Enjoyment is permissible. Plotinus was not puritanical, but it shouldn't be the end. The response to beauty should be, what does this reveal? What is shining through? What am I really responding to when I find this beautiful? This reflection leads to a crucial recognition: am beautiful. Not the body necessarily, but the soul that perceives beauty. Only like knows like. Fire is recognized by fire, water by water, beauty by beauty. If I can recognize beauty in external things, it must be because beauty exists in me, the soul's inherent form, its essential nature. This recognition is transformative. The soul stops seeking beauty only externally and begins cultivating it internally. Ethics becomes aesthetic, not in the trivial sense of making oneself physically attractive, but in the profound sense of making the soul beautiful, by ordering it properly, purifying it of deformity, allowing its natural luminosity to shine without obstruction. The beautiful soul is the virtuous soul. Courage is beautiful because it is soul maintaining its integrity under pressure. Temperance is beautiful because it is soul properly proportioned, desires subordinated to reason. Justice is beautiful because it is soul correctly ordered in relation to others. Wisdom is beautiful because it is soul transparent to truth. As the soul becomes beautiful, it becomes capable of perceiving higher beauties. Crude souls perceive only crude beauties, physical attractiveness, sensory pleasures. Refined souls perceive refined beauties, elegant proofs, profound insights, noble actions. The most refined souls perceive the most refined beauty, the forms themselves, existing eternally in intellect. Finally, at the summit, beauty leads beyond itself. When the soul has ascended through all levels of beauty, when it has become so unified and so beautiful that it reflects the divine without distortion, it transcends even beauty into the good itself, the one that is beyond all categories, beyond even the supremely desirable category of beauty. Plotinus's teaching on beauty was not merely aesthetic theory, it was practical soteriology, a method of salvation through aesthetic experience. For souls more inclined toward feeling than reasoning, beauty could accomplish what logical argument accomplishes for others: turn attention from sensible to intelligible, from external to internal, from multiplicity to unity. This is why art mattered to Plotinus. Not entertainment or decoration, but revelation. Great art makes visible what is normally invisible, the forms shining through matter, soul's creative activity made manifest, the eternal cascading into time. The artist who understands this becomes a kind of priest, creating occasions for others' contemplative awakening. The beautiful body, the beautiful action, the beautiful theorem, the beautiful artwork, all are invitations. They call to the soul: remember what you are. Remember where you came from. Remember that you are not fundamentally material but spiritual, not fundamentally separate but unified with all beauty, not fundamentally fallen but eternally resident in the intelligible realm, even while temporarily expressed in the physical. Beauty was Plotinus's most effective teaching tool because it required no technical knowledge, no prior philosophical training, no special talent. Anyone who had ever been arrested by beauty, stopped in their tracks by a sunset, moved by music, transfixed by a face, had already experienced the beginning of philosophical awakening. They simply needed guidance to understand what they had experienced and follow it to its source. Union achieved. 4 times in his life, Plotinus experienced complete union with the One. Porphyry records this with appropriate awe. 4 times in 66 years. Not frequently, not easily, not at will, but 4 times. The thing his entire philosophy described and aimed toward actually occurred. The theoretical became actual. The map became the territory. What was it like? Porphyry's account is frustratingly brief. He tells us only that Plotinus experienced being lifted up toward that first and transcendent God, by thought and the ways mentioned by Plato in the Symposium. During the 6 years Porphyry studied with him, Plotinus achieved union once more, the 4th and final time. Plotinus himself wrote about the experience, but his descriptions dissolve into paradox and negation. How do you describe what transcends description? How do you report an experience that occurred beyond the subject-object duality that makes reporting possible? In the treatise on the 3 primary hypostases, Ennead v1, Plotinus wrote, "This is the life of gods and of godlike and blessed men, liberation from the things of this world, a life that takes no delight in the things of this world. Escape of the alone to the alone. Escape of the alone to the alone," perhaps his most famous phrase, capturing both the utter simplicity and the radical solitude of the experience. Not the soul going somewhere else, not consciousness expanding to encompass more. Radical simplification where all multiplicity dissolves, where even the distinction between self and source vanishes, where nothing remains but pure unity. He described the approach to this state. First, the soul must turn away from external things, must close the eyes to sensory experience, must withdraw attention from the body. This creates interior silence, not absence of sound, but absence of distraction, consciousness no longer pulled outward. Then comes the difficult part, silencing thought itself. Not stopping thinking through force that merely creates tension. Rather, allowing thoughts to settle naturally like sediment in water, becoming still. Discursive reasoning quiets. The constant stream of commentary ceases. Concepts and categories that normally structure awareness become transparent. What remains is intellect direct knowing without the mediation of discursive thought. At this level, consciousness is purely intuitive, grasping all truths simultaneously rather than sequentially. This is already extraordinary unitive knowledge where knower and known are not separate, where thinking is identical with being, but even this must be transcended. Intellect, though unified, still contains the minimal duality of knowing and being known. To reach the one requires going beyond even this subtle distinction. How? Plotinus used the metaphor of light overwhelming vision. When light is moderate, we see objects clearly, distinctions are preserved. When light intensifies, distinctions blur, we see less clearly because there's too much light. When light becomes absolutely intense, we see nothing at all, not because of darkness, but because of excessive light. The seer is overwhelmed by light, becomes light, loses the separate standpoint from which seeing occurs. Similarly with the One, as the soul ascends, it leaves behind distinctions, first physical, then conceptual, then even the distinction between knower and known. What arrives at the One is no longer properly called soul or intellect or it is something simpler than any of these terms imply. And what it encounters is beyond encounter, because encountering requires two terms. The experience is not ecstasy in the sense of going outside oneself. Rather, it is finding oneself more deeply than ever, finding that the deepest interiority is identical with absolute transcendence. The most interior is the most exterior. The ground of self is the ground of everything. Plotinus was careful to distinguish this from mere emotional intensity or psychological catharsis. The union is not feeling, though it may be accompanied by profound peace or joy. It is not vision, though it may be preceded by inner light. It is not thought, though it may be approached through philosophical contemplation. It is beyond all these categories. Is it unconscious? No, rather, it is superconscious. Consciousness so unified it transcends the subject-object structure of ordinary awareness. Is it temporary? In one sense, yes, the soul returns to normal duality. Couldn't function in the world otherwise. But in another sense, no, the soul that has experienced union is permanently transformed. It knows beyond doubt what most merely believe or speculate, that the One is real, that union is possible, that the self is not fundamentally separate but unified with absolute reality. How do such experiences arise? Not through techniques alone, no method guarantees them, but practice prepares the ground. Ethical purification removes obstacles, attachments, aversions, emotional turbulence that keep consciousness trapped at lower levels. Intellectual discipline trains attention, develops the capacity for sustained contemplation on intelligible rather than sensible realities. Aesthetic sensitivity awakens the soul to beauty, creates openness to what transcends the ordinary. With preparation complete, the experience comes as grace not earned, but not entirely unearned. The soul that has purified itself, turned toward truth, climbed the ladder of contemplation, sometimes finds that the final step is not taken but given. The One, though beyond will and intention, somehow responds to the soul's aspiration. Or perhaps more accurately, the soul finally removes the obstacles that were blocking what was always available. The experience transforms everything. After union, ordinary life continues, eating, sleeping, teaching, writing, but the center has shifted. The person who returns is not the person who ascended, though externally they appear the same. Identity has been fundamentally relocated from surface to depth, from temporary to eternal, from separate to unified. This transformation is not dramatic in any theatrical sense. Plotinus didn't become superhuman. He still experienced pain as chronic illness worsened through his 60s. He still experienced grief. He mourned when students died. He still experienced the full range of human emotions. But these were now experienced from a different place, not as defining one's identity, but as passing conditions of embodied existence. The mystical experiences also transformed his teaching. He could speak about the One not as abstract principle, but as lived reality. When students asked whether union was possible, he could answer from experience, yes. When they asked what it was like, he could describe it inadequately, paradoxically, but authentically. Moreover, the experiences validated his entire philosophical system. The metaphysics he taught was not speculative construction, but accurate map of reality's actual structure. The One he described philosophically was the one he encountered experientially. The path of purification and contemplation he prescribed for others was the path he himself had traveled. Yet Plotinus never made the mystical experiences the center of his teaching. They were mentioned rarely, described sparingly, never used to claim special authority or establish hierarchy among students. Why this reticence? Partly because the experiences were ineffable. Talking about them too much falsifies them, makes them seem like objects of consciousness when they transcend the subject-object duality. Partly because they could not be communicated directly. Each soul must achieve union through its own effort and grace. Partly because focusing on extraordinary experiences can become an obstacle. Desire for mystical states can become attachment like any other, trapping the soul rather than liberating it. The goal was not peak experiences, but transformation of ordinary consciousness. The mystical unions were confirmations, not achievements to be accumulated. What mattered was the progressive purification and elevation of daily awareness, living increasingly from the rational soul rather than from bodily passions, thinking increasingly about eternal rather than temporal matters, identifying increasingly with what is unchanging in oneself rather than with what is constantly changing. The mystical experiences demonstrated that the summit was reachable, but the real work was the climb day by day, thought by thought, choice by choice, gradually orienting consciousness toward its source. Most of life is not spent in mystical union, but in the disciplines that prepare for it and the integration that follows it. For Plotinus's students, knowing that their teacher had achieved what he taught was powerful. It meant the philosophy was not mere speculation, but lived wisdom. The map was accurate because the cartographer had actually traveled the territory. When Plotinus described the path to union, he knew what he was talking about, not from books, but from having walked it. This gave his teaching an authority that rational argument alone could not provide. Philosophy was not just ideas to consider, but a way of life that actually led where it promised. The transformation it described was not metaphor, but reality. The union it pointed toward was not distant future, but available present, rare, difficult, requiring immense preparation, but actual, achievable, the ultimate fulfillment of human existence. Porphyry records in 263 AD, when Porphyry of Tyre arrived in Rome to study with Plotinus, the philosopher was nearly 60 years old. His health was declining. His voice had weakened to a hoarse whisper. The mysterious illness, possibly leprosy, possibly lupus, possibly something else, was progressing. Students had to lean close to hear him speak. Yet his intellectual power remained extraordinary. Porphyry, already an accomplished philosopher and literary critic in his own right, was immediately impressed. He had studied with Longinus in Athens, perhaps the most prestigious philosophical teacher of the era. But Longinus's approach was primarily scholarly, analyzing texts, debating interpretations, maintaining philosophical tradition. Plotinus was something else entirely, living philosopher, creating new synthesis, speaking from direct experience. Porphyry had arrived in Rome skeptical. He was drawn to philosophy, but also to literature, rhetoric, and practical wisdom. He was intellectually ambitious, somewhat vain, prone to depression. He questioned whether philosophical transformation was truly possible or merely theoretical ideal. His relationship with Plotinus would transform him completely. The early months were difficult. Porphyry struggled to understand Plotinus's teaching. The ideas were extraordinarily abstract: emanation, hierarchy of being, the one beyond being. The discussions ranged across texts Porphyry knew, and some he didn't. Plotinus assumed deep familiarity with Plato, Aristotle, and earlier philosophical tradition. His style was elusive, dense, assuming rather than explaining. Moreover, Plotinus's other students, Emilius especially, had been studying with him for years. They spoke a philosophical language Porphyry was still learning. They could follow arguments Porphyry found obscure. They participated in contemplative practices Porphyry had never attempted. Then, sometime in his first year, Porphyry experienced a crisis. Porphyry himself later wrote about it openly. He became convinced that life was worthless, that suicide was the rational response to existence. This was not fleeting depression, but philosophical despair, the conclusion that the burdens of embodied existence outweigh any possible satisfaction, that wisdom itself reveals the futility of continuing. Plotinus recognized what was happening. He didn't merely offer consolation or rebut Porphyry's arguments. Instead, he diagnosed the problem philosophically. Porphyry's despair came from melancholy, not from reason. Melancholy, a state we would now call depression, was coloring his thinking, making negative conclusions appear more rational than they were. The solution was not philosophical argument, but change of location, change of environment, interruption of the melancholic pattern. Plotinus advised Porphyry to travel to Sicily, not as escape, but as therapy. The change of scene, the sea voyage, the different atmosphere would break the melancholic cycle, allow perspective to return. Porphyry went. The advice worked. When he returned to Rome, the suicidal despair had lifted. He could see it for what it was: temporary state, not philosophical truth. This incident reveals something crucial about Plotinus's teaching method. He didn't treat philosophy as purely intellectual exercise separate from psychological and physical well-being. The soul is embodied. Melancholy affects thinking. Physical illness influences mental state. The philosopher must be psychologist and physician, as well as metaphysician. Porphyry resumed his studies with new appreciation. He now understood that philosophical transformation is not just intellectual, but involves whole person body, emotions, thought, spirit. Over the following years, he became one of Plotinus's most dedicated students. It was Porphyry who insisted that Plotinus write. For 10 years, Plotinus had taught without producing texts. His reasons were multiple. Writing seemed secondary to actual teaching. Words could be misunderstood. The living interaction of discussion was more important than fixed texts. But Porphyry argued, your teaching is too important to exist only in your students' memories. Future generations need access to it. If you die without writing, much will be lost. Plotinus reluctantly agreed. He began writing treatises, not systematic exposition, but responses to specific questions students had raised. The writing was difficult. Plotinus's eyesight was failing. He couldn't reread what he wrote. He dictated some pieces, wrote others in his own hand with great effort. His handwriting was terrible, letters ill-formed, words running together, no concern for legibility. Porphyry became his editor. He organized the treatises, corrected obvious scribal errors, arranged them thematically. Eventually, he compiled them into the Ennead, 6 groups of 9 treatises each. The arrangement was not chronological but logical, moving from ethics to cosmology to psychology to metaphysics, culminating in treatises on the one. This editorial work was painstaking. Porphyry had to decipher Plotinus's handwriting, identify which treatises responded to which questions, determine the best arrangement for comprehensibility. He was not changing Plotinus's words, he was remarkably faithful to the original, but he was giving them structure and accessibility they otherwise lacked. During these years, Plotinus's health deteriorated steadily. The skin condition worsened. His throat became so affected he could barely swallow. He developed what sounds like tuberculosis, constant coughing, wasting of the body, extreme weakness. By the late 60s, he could no longer teach regularly. Students visited individually rather than gathering for group discussions. Yet he continued writing. Some of his most profound treatises date from his final years, on eternity and time, on contemplation, on the good or the one. As his body failed, his philosophical vision became more concentrated, more essential, more powerful. Physical weakness seemed to clarify rather than diminish intellectual capacity. Porphyry observed this with amazement and recorded it carefully. He was witnessing philosophy not just as theory, but as way of dying, the soul maintaining its essential activity in as the body collapsed, identifying more completely with what is eternal as what is temporal failed. Plotinus was demonstrating what he taught, that the soul is not destroyed by the body's destruction, that consciousness is not identical with its physical vehicle, that the real self is beyond mortality. In 268 AD, Rome was struck by plague again. The city was already weakened by political chaos. The Emperor Gallienus was assassinated that year. Disease, violence, and economic collapse combined to make Rome increasingly unlivable. Plotinus, recognizing he was dying, decided to leave the city. He traveled to Campania, to the estate of a friend, seeking peaceful location for his final days. Only a few students accompanied him. Emilius, his longest-standing disciple, was in Syria and wouldn't return in time. Porphyry was still in Sicily, recovering from his earlier crisis. The small group that traveled with Plotinus included a physician named Eustochius, who would be present at the death. The journey from Rome to Campania was difficult. Plotinus was extremely weak, could barely travel, but he insisted. Something in him knew it was time to leave, to find quiet place away from the chaotic city, to complete his life away from distraction. What Porphyry recorded next comes from Eustochius's account. Porphyry himself would not arrive until after the death, but Eustochius told him what happened in those final weeks, and Porphyry preserved it in the life of Plotinus, our only source for how the philosopher died. The estate in Campania was rural, simple, peaceful. Plotinus's condition stabilized briefly, then continued to decline. He could not eat. His throat had closed almost completely. Speaking was nearly impossible, yet visitors report he remained conscious, aware, himself until the very end. The physical suffering was substantial. The skin disease was painful. The inability to swallow was agonizing. The wasting of the body was extreme. Yet there was no panic, no desperation, no fear. Eustochius observed that Plotinus seemed to regard his body's dissolution with the same detachment he had taught regarding all material conditions, real, but not ultimate, temporary, but not tragic, end of embodied phase, but not end of soul. As death approached, Plotinus's teaching would face its ultimate test. Could philosophy as he understood it actually sustain someone through dying? Could the soul maintain its proper orientation even as the body failed completely? Could consciousness remain identified with its eternal nature as its temporal vehicle dissolved? The answer was being prepared in those final days in Campania, an answer that would either validate or falsify everything Plotinus had taught about the soul, death, and the eternal destiny of consciousness. Eternal return. Campania, 270 AD. The estate was quiet except for birdsong and the distant sound of the sea. Plotinus lay in a simple room, his body wasting, his breath labored, death approaching. Eustochius, the physician, was the only other person present. He had left the room briefly fetching water, attending to some necessary task. When he returned, he found Plotinus speaking, not to Eustochius, to himself, or to something beyond the room. The words Eustochius heard and reported to Porphyry, who recorded them for history, were, "I am making my last effort to return that which is divine in me to that which is divine in the universe." Then Plotinus died. A snake emerged from the wall where he lay, disappeared through a hole, and was never seen again. Whether this detail is literal or symbolic, Eustochius reported it, and Porphyry recorded it. The ancient world interpreted such signs seriously, the snake as symbol of transformation, of wisdom, of the soul's departure from the body. Those last words encapsulate everything Plotinus taught. Not, "I hope to go to heaven," not, "I pray for salvation," even, "I seek union with God," rather, "am returning that which is divine in me to that which is divine in the universe." The phrasing is precise, philosophical, personal. The soul is not his private possession seeking personal salvation. It is a portion of the universal soul, temporarily individuated, now returning to its source. The death occurred in solitude, only physician present. No dramatic deathbed scene with grieving disciples. This too seems appropriate. The ascent to the one is ultimately solitary, escape of the alone to the alone. Why should death, the final separation from body, be any different? Word reached Rome slowly. When Porphyry learned of it in Sicily, he was devastated. He had lost his teacher before fully absorbing the teaching. He had left Rome to recover from depression, intending to return. Now return was impossible. Plotinus was gone. The school effectively ended. The Roman circle dispersed. Aemilius continued teaching philosophy in Syria. Other students carried the teaching to different cities: Alexandria, Athens, Carthage. Some remained in Rome, but without the unifying presence of Plotinus himself. The intimate philosophical community that had formed around him dissolved. Yet the teaching itself did not die. Porphyry became its primary guardian. He collected all of Plotinus's writings, treatises scattered among students, drafts in various states of completion, letters, notes from lectures. He edited them carefully, preserving Plotinus's distinctive style while organizing them for comprehensibility. The Ennead's 6 groups of 9 treatises became Porphyry's monument to his teacher. The arrangement was deliberate, beginning with ethics and aesthetics, accessible entry points, moving through cosmology and psychology, intermediate metaphysics, culminating in the treatises on intellect and the one the highest teaching. A reader could follow this progression from beginning understanding to advanced contemplation. But Porphyry did more than edit. He wrote the life of Plotinus, a biography unlike any previous philosophical biography. Rather than chronicling external events, Porphyry focused on Plotinus's inner life, his teaching method, his character, his philosophical development. The life presents Plotinus as ideal philosopher, combining intellectual rigor with mystical experience, systematic thinking with practical wisdom, theoretical knowledge with transformative practice. The portrait Porphyry painted was both historical and hagiographical. He wanted to present Plotinus as he was, but also as model for future philosophers. Some details are certainly idealized: the claim that Plotinus never revealed his birthday because he disdained bodily existence, the report that he refused portraiture out of philosophical principle, the various miraculous occurrences that accompanied his teaching. Yet the overall picture is convincing. A man who lived his philosophy completely, who maintained intellectual integrity without arrogance, who achieved mystical experience without losing rational clarity, who taught profound wisdom without claiming superiority, who died as he lived, oriented toward the eternal even as the temporal dissolved. Within decades, Plotinus's philosophy spread throughout the Mediterranean world. Christian theologians read him, sometimes accepting, sometimes rejecting, always engaging seriously with his ideas. Ambrose of Milan drew heavily on Plotinus for his sermons. Augustine read the Enneads and found their philosophical language for experiences he already knew from Christian mysticism. The synthesis of Neoplatonism and Christianity that would shape medieval thought began here. In Alexandria, Plotinus's teaching influenced both Christian and pagan philosophers. Iamblichus, a generation after Porphyry, developed Neoplatonism in more theurgical directions, emphasizing ritual, symbols, intermediary beings between human and divine. This diverged from Plotinus's emphasis on contemplation, but it spread Neoplatonic metaphysics to wider audience. In Athens, the Neoplatonic school established by Plutarch of Athens became the last great pagan philosophical academy. It maintained Plotinus's emphasis on both rational philosophy and contemplative practice. Proclus, in the 5th century, systematized Neoplatonism further, creating elaborate hierarchies of being. When Justinian closed the academy in 529 AD, this tradition migrated to Persia, where it influenced Islamic philosophy. In the Islamic world, Plotinus's thought transmitted through Arabic translations and filtered through Proclus's systematizations became foundational. The great Islamic philosophers Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, Avicenna, Averroes all engaged deeply with Neoplatonic metaphysics. Sufi mysticism absorbed Plotinus's emphasis on the soul's ascent toward divine union. The synthesis of Neoplatonism and Islamic theology shaped centuries of Islamic intellectual life. When medieval Europe rediscovered Greek philosophy through Arabic sources, Plotinus returned indirectly. Thomas Aquinas never read the Enneads directly, but Neoplatonic ideas permeated his sources: Augustine, Pseudo-Dionysius, Avicenna. The medieval Christian synthesis of faith and reason with substantial debt to Plotinian metaphysics, hierarchy of being, participation of lower and higher, divine simplicity, mystical union as possibility for human souls. The Renaissance brought direct rediscovery. Marsilio Ficino translated the Enneads into Latin in 1492, making them accessible to Western Europe for the first time in centuries. Suddenly Plotinus could be read in his own words rather than through intermediaries. The impact was immediate. Renaissance philosophers found in Plotinus a spirituality that reconciled classical wisdom with Christian faith, a mysticism that was intellectually rigorous, an affirmation of beauty and the visible world as manifestations of divine. The Florentine Platonist Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, others made Neoplatonism foundational to Renaissance humanism. The idea that humans are intermediary beings capable of ascending toward divine through cultivation of soul-shaped Renaissance anthropology. The emphasis on beauty as path to transcendence influenced Renaissance art. The notion of cosmos as living organism animated Renaissance natural philosophy. In the modern era, Plotinus's influence became more diffuse, but remained substantial. German idealism Schelling, Hegel drew heavily on Neoplatonic categories. The Romantic emphasis on imagination as faculty transcending mere reason echoes Plotinian psychology. Transcendentalism in America Emerson, Thoreau absorbed Neoplatonic ideas through multiple channels. Even contemporary philosophy and psychology show traces. Process philosophy's emphasis on reality as dynamic rather than static reflects Plotinian insights. Depth psychology's mapping of consciousness into levels conscious, unconscious, collective unconscious parallels Plotinus's hierarchy of soul. Transpersonal psychology's interest in mystical states as higher development owes debt to Plotinian framework. Beyond academic philosophy, Plotinus's vision persists in spiritual seeking. The perennial philosophy, the idea that all mystical traditions point toward the same ultimate reality, is essentially Plotinian. The emphasis in many spiritual movements on higher self versus ego reflects Plotinus's distinction between true soul and surface personality. The practice of meditation as progressive simplification of consciousness toward undifferentiated awareness follows Plotinian logic. Yet Plotinus himself would likely be puzzled by his influence. He sought not to create school of thought, but to guide souls toward realization. The Enneads were not meant as scripture, but as practical guidance for ascent. The goal was not to study Plotinus, but to achieve what Plotinus achieved: direct knowledge of reality's structure through philosophical contemplation and mystical union. In this sense, his deepest legacy is not textual but practical. the possibility he demonstrated that philosophical reflection can become transformative practice, that systematic metaphysics can coexist with mystical experience, that rigorous thinking is not opposed to but preparatory for transcendent awareness. 1750 years after his death, the questions Plotinus addressed remain vital. What is ultimate reality? What is the self? Is there meaning beyond material existence? Can consciousness transcend its ordinary limitations? Is union with the absolute possible? His answers one reality in hierarchical levels, the self as fundamentally eternal, meaning found through recognizing what we truly are, consciousness capable of transformation through philosophical discipline, union possible through progressive simplification toward absolute unity remain philosophically compelling and practically relevant. The man who died alone in Campania, returning the divine in himself to the divine in the universe, left a legacy that transcends particular historical period or cultural context. He articulated perennial wisdom in systematic philosophical form. He demonstrated that the life of the mind and the life of the spirit are not separate pursuits, but two aspects of single journey, the soul's return to its source.